All right. Hey folks, as promised, we're a minute late, but that's okay. I'm Mike Brown, T M Brown's the author name, but people, my friends and family obviously know me as Mike. We're gathered here tonight with our very first Hometown Novel Writers Author event here at the brand new, paint drying on the walls still, Coweta FORCE building on Salviti Street, right behind the Presbyterian Church on downtown Newnan. Matter of fact, they're still redoing the driveway up front, the parking lot up front, and you got to come around back to come visit with us here tonight. But we also wanted to welcome all of our Facebook Live folks that wanted to chime in. Tonight, I'm going to have Scott here in a moment introduce the authors that we have tonight. I think you're going to be greatly surprised. Again, the mission of Hometown Novel Writers is to introduce local authors to local audiences. And for the writers out there looking to try to be on board, please get in touch with us. And those that are not published yet, fine. We've got Hometown Novel writers groups as well, and meetings and workshops that you can be involved in. Just a quick heads up, tomorrow night there's going to be a few of the Hometown Novel authors that will be at Corner Arts Gallery during summer wind-up in downtown Newnan from 5 to 9. So you're more than welcome to stop in there. Many of the books of all of the Hometown Novel writers basically have their books at Corner Arts Gallery. So you can stop in there. There's a hometown bookstore advantage that way. Then after that, we have coming up July 2nd, there's going to be a bunch of us that are going to brave being at the Moreland Puckett Station 75th anniversary of the Independence Day celebration in Moreland, which began in 1947. I'm not even that old. So, almost, but not quite that old. And it's going to be a fun event, and we've got 7 authors that are going to be there. So, y'all come on out, enjoy that. They've got tons of vendors, plenty of food. They're known for their barbecue. On July 16th, we've got our next Hometown Novel Writers Program that will be hosted at the Newnan Carnegie Library, and we've got some great lineup of authors for that. So, pay attention to the Hometown Novel Nights. And or go on to hometownnovel.com, and you also can see all of the other events that we're involved in, workshops and meetings. And if any of the current writer members of the organization are peeking in, remember June 25th, Saturday, come on out to the Old Town Library in Sharpsburg. We've got a meeting at 11 o'clock, and then we've got Scott, Ludwig, and Angie Gallion making a presentation on the author roundtable time frame. So I'm going to turn this over to Scott, and well, first of all, where's Hank? There's Hank. Hank and Shelly are here. You're going to have to come up here, unless I'm going to come on up here. I'm going to introduce our host and hostess with the mostest right here, and this is Hank, Arnold, and Shelly. If you're from Newnan, you're supposed to already know these folks, but if you don't know them, this is an opportunity for them to maybe say a little bit about Coweta FORCE and what's going on here, and I'll give you a couple minutes to do that, and Scott, you pick it up.
Thank you. Doesn't he do a great job? He's like a natural. Voice and everything. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you guys for allowing us to host this event, which is really meaningful to us to be immersed in our community and just be a part of our community and be a part of the fabric of who we are and what we do as a community. So, my name is Hank Arnold, and I am the founder and director of Coweta FORCE. And Coweta FORCE exists to provide addiction recovery support services for individuals and family members that have been impacted by addiction. And the reason why we started that is because addiction is the #1 health concern in the United States right now. And a lot of people don't know this because it's not a popular topic, is that if you're an American under the age of 50, you're more likely to die of a substance-related injury or overdose than anything else. It's the #1 cause of death for Americans under the age of 50, and we aren't talking about it. And it's tragic. So, I felt like I was sitting around waiting for somebody else to do something about it. Nobody was doing anything. So I was like, I gotta do something. And what drove that passion is that I'm also a person in long-term recovery. What that means for me is I haven't used alcohol or any other drug to change the way I experience life in a little over 12 years. And as a result of that, I have got my life back. I'm also a returned citizen from the criminal justice system. Right? You wouldn't know that by looking at me. But because of the opportunities I've had to get and stay well, I have been restored. There's been a lot of restoration. And I talk about my recovery and being a returned citizen for a couple of reasons. One is because if I never tell anybody, people won't know. Number two, it is my job to change public perception on those people in our community, because I am those people. And if it weren't for the community that I had and the opportunities I had to get and stay well, I wouldn't be who I am today, right? And so I would like for our entire community to become more recovery friendly and become more recovery educated. My wife and I are Coweta County residents. We are parents of 5 children. 4 of those children are teenage girls. We're not scared of anything, right? So that's just a little bit about me and a little bit about the organization, but I have my lovely wife here who is also very involved in the organization, and the reason why it looks the way it looks and does the things that it does is because of her, so I would like for her to just take a second to introduce yourself.
Just a second, because I don't do the talking, he does the talking. So I'm Shelly Arnold, and I am an ally for recovery, and what that means is that I love or support someone who is in recovery from substance use. One of the things that I felt so passionate about after meeting my husband was educating people about addiction and substances, because I didn't know anything about it before I met him. I definitely had some idea of what that looked like in my mind, but it certainly wasn't the man that I decided to marry, and so it's just changed so much for me, and I feel so strongly about people getting more educated. So one thing we do here is trainings, and we can, organizations can come together and just kind of have a free training that can tell you more about it and just be more recovery friendly.
Yeah, and I saw our report, our numbers last month, where we served over 1,900 people in the month.
Wow.
In the month, and so this is a place for people to land to do recovery long term, because we know recovery is a lifestyle, and we know that there are a lot of things that are impacted, but a lot of that is safe social activities and safe environments and networks, and also good opportunities for people to be able to move out of the situation that they're in. So we try to provide all those social pieces and the opportunity to connect with people. We know that connection is very valuable for folks in recovery. So and we've had the opportunity to partner with Scott and Cindy and met them probably around a little over a year ago, and there's been a lot of conversations and a lot of connections and a ton of support. And so I'm just grateful that you guys are here and have an interest in our mission, and we're grateful to provide a space for this event.
Hank, I'm going to tell you something, and y'all can hear me, but y'all have to see me again. I can tell that God's involved in this because of the type of facility that you have here, which you don't have the time tonight to be able to walk around and look at all these different rooms. But this is just one of how many rooms in here, Shelly, roughly? I don't know, a couple of dozen anyway.
I think there's 15.
15 rooms. This is a huge meeting room. There's a library next door that's being stacked with books. If you are interested in donating some good used books or new books, that's fine too. They won't turn those down. So please do that. There's another reason why Scott and I recommended this being Inspirational Author Night, and that was kind of where we launched with that. So we happen to have 2 pastors in the group. And we know Karen, Scott knows Karen Ketcham and very well. So we're just so pleased that we're able to help launch this. And maybe one of these nights you can do a Facebook Live walking around and show everybody. That'd be awesome. Get some more support. All right. God's good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott, turn it over to you.
Amen. Well, between Mike and Shelly and Hank, they took everything I was going to say tonight. No, but I will say that actually we've known Hank and Shelly, my wife and I, for a little over 2 years. And the first time we met them, this was a vision. And you know how construction and things like that are now, but if you could see where they were and where they are now in less than 2 years, it's really quite amazing. So I really encourage you, you're doing yourself a disservice by not being here tonight. So when we meet again here in 2 months on the 3rd Thursday in August, when it's going to be a lot colder, it's going to be in the mid-90s instead of the low hundreds. I encourage you to come, and I know that I hope we have a big audience at home tonight because we've got a really good panel lined up. Our audience here tonight, it's a little less than we expected, but it reminds me of a story about David Baldacci, and everybody knows who that is, right? Famous author. Okay. He talked one time about he was doing a book launch, and he showed up and they had an auditorium reserved for him, seated like 400 people. And he came in there and there was you know, food on the side and all this hoopla and all cameras everywhere. And he got ready to speak, and there was one guy sitting in the third row right dead center, hanging on every word he said. That was the only one all night. And at some point he said, "You're here to see me?" Because he was hoping he'd just get out of the engagement altogether. He said, so he did his presentation all the way through, and he said, "Do you have any questions?" And he raised his hand. He said, "Yes." He said, "Are those cookies for us?" So we don't have any cookies for you, but we do have drinks if you like, water and the cola and all. How we became involved with Shelly and Hank. A little over 2 years ago, we lost our son to addiction. And this is actually the first time we've talked about it in public, so bear with me if something happens. But anyway, it was a little over 2 years ago, and we met Shelly and Hank. And the reason we met them was because when Josh came to visit, he always came here for his recovery meetings, and he loved coming here. Well, actually, technically, it was the other building, but he loved Coweta FORCE. It was very supportive. He got a good boost from it. He felt good when he came home, and he always relied on him when he was with us out of town for him. So when he passed, my wife and I were going through his things, and she found an essay that he had written to get into graduate school. He graduated from Kennesaw State, and he wanted to go back to be a counselor. And in his letter for admission, it said something, and he got admitted. It said something about he wanted to leave an awesome legacy, and he never got the chance to do that. So Cindy and I kind of took it upon ourselves to do that for him, and that's when we got involved with Hank and Shelly. We sponsored 2 of the rooms, one of them being the library right next door, and believe it or not, the shelves are already almost completely full. So Hank, Shelly, more shelves. And if you ever do get the chance to visit, and I hope you do, because this place is wonderful. Shelly did a great job. And that's not the shortchanged Hank, because Hank laid this thing out. So between the 2 of them, they did a top-notch job. The first room that you come in is a Pure Lounge, and it's named after Josh. So that's kind of special to us as well. So if you ever get the chance, I encourage you to come by and see it. All right? Now you're going to meet some authors, not David Baldacci. You guys got a much bigger audience. And they've been prepped. We changed the format in our last meeting. We used to have one speaker talk for 15 to 20 minutes, and then we pass the mic down the table. So we changed the format last month where we do more of a round robin, and we ask one question, they'll each answer. We've got a series of 3 questions, and I'll repeat them in case you need to do this. Okay? And last time it didn't work so well because the authors didn't know what the questions were until I asked them. So they were kind of, you guys already saw them, so you know now. But let me go look at the questions one more time. The questions in order will be, tell us a little something about yourself, where you're from, your family, and your life in general. Second question will be, tell us about your writing journey, how you became interested in writing, who or what inspires you, how you go about your writing. And the third one will be, what have you written, and what are you currently working on? So, are we good with that?
Perfect.
Okay. And one thing we've done since last November is I introduced the authors by reading one of their book reviews. You guys okay with that? I've been trying to read bad ones.
Okay, good.
Last month I did read a lot of bad ones, but they were for people like Stephen King and Pat Conroy. So, all right. So, and the reason we do this is for 3 reasons. I don't want to steal any of their thunder when if I talk about their founders. I was going to say that. Right, Mike?
Oh, absolutely.
I don't want to steal their thunder. So,
Never.
The second reason, to serve as a reminder to all of our readers out there that authors really appreciate your reviews, even the bad ones. So if you read their book, take a minute and do a review. And the third one is it makes my job really easy. So, I'm going to introduce them down the line, and you're sitting in the right order. So, our first introduction, the review. I found the book absolutely delightful. Along with the author's insightful and helpful guide to draw you into a daily deeper walk with Christ, he gives a wonderful description of life's journey reminiscent of Pilgrim's Progress. Drawing from his lifetime experience as a backpacker, he describes a young Christian trying to muddle through life, walking along a path that draws us nearer to God. Thus, it is excellent on two fronts. First, if you desire a closer walk with Christ and find yourself not growing the way you would like, this is the book for you. The author describes how to... This is my normal voice, unfortunately.
Y'all just wait, he's just choked up.
And I don't smoke. The author describes how to study the scriptures, ask yourself questions about them, and begins to help the reader build a spiritual relationship with the trailblazer of the universe. Second, his depiction of a young person beginning a walk with Jesus and finding the help of the body of believers in his journey is excellent. In reading this book, I found myself constantly checking my spiritual attitude and welfare, something that you may find helpful in your own walk. The book is titled Following Jesus, a 21-Day Journey, and the author is Tim Riordan. Tim? You should talk right now, so give my
Okay,
voice
sure.
back. No.
I'm a preacher, I can talk.
We haven't got that long, Tim.
I'm so used to that. Now I'm used to Hank. All right, our second author, the review. The book is a pleasant read with hints of history, drama, excitement, and a love story for the ages. Reading it takes you on a journey with a young woman who is captured by Indians. The author gives such detail that you feel like you are by her side. You feel her emotions, her pain, her joy, and her love. You cry with her and laugh with her. It is a book you will enjoy, not want to put down, and will want to read again. I loved it. The book is titled Standing There is Bright Angel, and the author is Karen Ketcham. And our third author, the review. The author has an astonishing way of intertwining his personal encounters with words of wisdom that could only come from God's teaching and blessings. If you're looking to start a walk with Jesus or enhance the journey you are on, this book will give you some tools you can use to build a path with Christ. After finishing this book, I am left with a few new perspectives and I'm reaching deep to see how I can become the door holder Christ needs me to be. God bless the author, and I am thankful God uses him to disciple us through these meaningful messages. The book is titled Following the Master, Stories of Sacramental Discipleship, and the author is Dr. Scott Ness. Now it's read. And again, the first question again, and we'll start with Tim. Tell us a little something about yourself, where you're from, your family, and your life in general.
Okay. Well, I am Tim Riordan. I do live here in Newnan. I'm pastor at Sunrise Baptist Church, and I've been serving that church now for almost 14 years. I grew up in Griffin, so I knew Shelly way back when. And I've got 6 children. My wife and I will be married for 39 years this December. So a long time. I grew up in Griffin. I went to school at the University of Georgia, so I do kind of bleed red and black. I can't help that. I received my master's from Southwestern Seminary and my doctorate from New Orleans. I love being in Newnan. This has been a great part of our journey. And so several of my kids have graduated from high school here. My youngest is 21, so we're sort of having the empty nest thing going on, sort of. She's a student at the University of North Georgia. I've got a daughter that just graduated from Liberty University with a degree in English. She's moving to China in a few weeks. She'll be teaching and doing, as you do mission work in China, it's a little different, but she'll be doing that. My youngest daughter is going to Italy to do mission work in the Alps. I said, you know, if you're going to suffer for Jesus, the Alps are a great place to do it. Yeah.
As she was packing her skis.
I said, don't you need your dad to go along? You know, just, my oldest daughter is a PA here in Newnan. She's married and has 3 children, so I've got 3 grandchildren through her. I've got my next youngest son is a worship pastor, though he is also been a producer, traveled around the world singing, a lot of different things. they've got one child and another one on the way in August, so I'll soon have 5 grandchildren here. I guess technically I've got 5 grandchildren. And I've got another son who's a PA in ICU for Piedmont, and a daughter that's a nurse. I've got 3 kids in medicine, which is great because when I have a medical problem, I call them up. It's bad because they stay on my case about my cholesterol and my blood pressure. But I've got an awesome family. I'm really blessed with my kids. And I can't remember how far I'm supposed to go with this. What was the entire question? Just who am I?
Just finally,
All right, that's it.
the background.
I'm Karen Ketcham, and I've been married to Mike, who knew Scott, for 49 years. We have 2 daughters who are light of our lives. Our oldest daughter is a free spirit. She is an artist. She's been married for 28 years, and she runs Studio 7 Sanctuary in Westminster, South Carolina. Our youngest daughter teaches for a private school, Eastgate Life Academy in Hiawassee, Georgia. We've got 4 grandchildren, a 27-year-old engineer that lives in California, who's trying desperately to get back home, but he had to go where the job was, and so he's trying to find another job right now. And our second grandson is 24, and he's like his mama. He's a free spirit. He's a gypsy. He and his wife travel for the fun of it. They go all over the country. They'll stop and work for a little while, get back in their camper, their trailer, or whatever they're in, and go somewhere else for a while. They're home right now, so we're getting to see them for a little bit. But then my 2 youngest ones, they're my youngest daughters, they're Gabe, he's fixed to turn 16, and my granddaughter, Lily, will be 11 soon. And both of them scored the highest GPA for their, Gabe got the highest GPA in his high school, Lily got the highest GPA in junior high. So they get their smarts not from me, from their daddy. But, yes, I worked for Bell South for 30 years. I've been retired now for 18. Hardly seems possible.
Thank you. Good to be with you all. Scott Ness. I grew up in Ohio. We moved here to Fayette County. I live in Sonoy, but the Fayette side of Sonoy. Very confusing. Right before COVID hit, which was awesome. I am married, and we have 6 children, and it's good to be here. My oldest is a rising junior, so 3 of our kids are biological, 3 of them are adopted, but they're full siblings. We adopted Alana. My wife actually cut the umbilical cord, which was really cool, so she's been ours since day 1. Stayed in touch. She was born out in Sacramento, California, stayed in touch with her birth mom. And she was diagnosed with terminal cancer twice. She beat it once. As she was battling it the second time, she was asked if we would adopt her other 2 children. And so we prayerfully said, why not? And so that we're in high school down to elementary school, and it's fun. When it's not. But most of the time it's great. They're great kids and wonderful and a blessing in so many ways. I'm a pastor in Fayetteville, the Lutheran Church there, Prince of Peace Lutheran Church. Yeah, it's been great. What else? We thought we were moving to Ethiopia to be missionaries for a while. That's in fact how we got here, and a little bit of what I'll share in a little bit. But we were going to move with 6 kids to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. If you know anything about Ethiopia, and I'm guessing not many people know a whole lot about it, but one of the reasons we ultimately didn't go was the agency that we were going with, and I was going to be in charge of discipleship for a large denomination over there, is that Addis Ababa pricing for living there is more expensive than New York City or Paris, France, or I mean, it's crazy. So you have to pay a whole lot, or you're living on the street. And a whole lot of people obviously live on the street. And, it's so we weren't there, and so but it's good to be here. And so kind of that story is a little bit of how my writing came to be. And, talk about that in a minute. So yeah, great.
I wanted to clarify something Karen said. She said She was married to Mike, who's known Scott for 49 years. What she meant was that she's been married to Mike for 49 years. I'm only 41. All right, can we start on this side this time? Are you good with that?
Sure.
Okay, second question. Tell us about your writing journey, how you became interested in writing, who or what inspires you, how you go about your writing.
Sure. Great.
In third grade, my teachers had a meeting with my parents because they were really worried because I couldn't put a sentence together. And so my mom, being an incredible mom that she is, worked really hard to find me a whole bunch of tutors and get a whole bunch of help, and so I learned how to write a little bit more. And so I really went from a place where I couldn't write at all to now having a book, which is kind of fun. But I find my inspiration as a pastor. The book that I wrote is called Following the Master, and it's discipleship, as I mentioned. That's one of the things I'm passionate about. And what I'm also passionate about is my tribe of Christian faith is Lutheran, and so that's a sacramental understanding, kind of like Catholic. We're diet Catholics is kind of one of the ways we describe ourselves. And as I read, so I wrote the book that I couldn't find on the shelves anywhere. There are millions of books about discipleship out there, but all of them really do a great job of talking about what we do. But I wanted to look at, okay, what is God's role in our discipleship? And so that's kind of where I get my inspiration is, what are the books that I want to read that I can't find to read? And how does that come together to bring forth something that is worthwhile for me and the audience that I'm trying to reach. And so I tell a lot of stories. I think stories are the key of everything. And so it's not a story, it's a bunch of stories that tell a larger story of what it means to be followers of Jesus and let him shape you and form you and walk with you. And so I love to collect stories. So one of my favorite stories from the book that really inspired me is I was at one of my mentors' house, and we're sitting in his kitchen, and he has us look up at the chandelier kind of light that's over his kitchen table. He tells us this is a Tiffany chandelier. Came from Tiffany's workshop, right? A pretty priceless and beautiful thing. And he said the thing about it is there were like 7 globes around it and one in the middle. And he said, now the thing about Tiffany's workshop is that Tiffany himself, he had an artisan workshop where he would come and train people, and they would do the work, and when it was ready to go for sale, he would have to sign off on it. He would have to say, okay, this is worthy of my name going on it. So not that his hands were on every piece that came out of it, but he had to sign off and say, that's worthy of my name, right? And so as my mentor was telling us, he said, now all 7 or 8 of these globes were signed off by Tiffany, but one, can you pick out which one wasn't signed off by him? And I was there with a bunch of my classmates, and my ego tells me that I should tell you that I got it right, I guessed right. It was a complete guess, because they all look amazing. But the idea being that the story there is, what does it look like for me to, at the end of my life, and you at the end of your life, to live your life so authentically, so faithfully, so obediently, that the Lord might look upon you and sign his name and say, yeah, you're mine. You're good enough. Not because of who you are, but because of who I am in you. And your obedience, your faithfulness, your willingness to risk, your willingness to love, your willingness to do the amazing things that Hank was talking about a little bit ago. And that the Lord might sign off his name on you to say, yeah, you're mine. You belong to me. And so that type of reality and those types of stories are where I get my inspiration of how to take complex realities and make them a little bit more understandable. That's one of the things I'm passionate about, how to recognize and point, make Jesus the subject of the active verbs. Jesus heals, Jesus walks with you, Jesus comes to you. It's not about what I do, it's about what he's done. And so a lot of that is my inspiration and focus, and then just living everyday life to try and see glimpses of him at work as we follow him and serve him, and really make all that stuff a little bit more accessible and I'm a preacher too, so I can keep going.
That's right.
Well, mine's not near as wonderful as that. This story is Steady Bear's Bright Angel, and it was just a story that was bopping around in my head for years. And then when my oldest daughter was in the Air National Guard, I went with her on a drill weekend down to Savannah, and I just told her the story, and she loved it and said, Mom, you've got to write this story down. So a few years later, when my mom was in the hospital for hip replacement, and I took the night shift, I stayed up with her all night. But you know, you had to be quiet, you couldn't watch TV or anything, so I started writing the book, and that was in 2008. I finished it in 2019. Oh, it took me 11 years. But I have a couple of sequels because the story was getting to be too big, so I'm hoping the next two won't take me 11 years to write. I may not live long enough to get it finished if it does. So that's all I can think of.
I write in 3 different genres, so it's a little complicated. I feel a little schizophrenic sometimes. But when I was a kid, reading was a big part of our family culture. We sat around together, my mom, my brothers, my sister, we would talk about books we had read and books we were going to read. So every year, somewhere before New Year's, we talk about the books we're going to read for the new year. So it was just part of our culture. And probably more inspired as the years went on by my older brother, who read just incredibly. And so it just challenged me because I knew that reading books could change my life. And so I began to grapple with the concept of, do I want to read the books that people write, or do I want to write the books that people read? And I felt compelled as a kid to influence people. And so somewhere along the way, I began working on a list of 100 things I wanted to do in my life. And one of them was to write 10 books. I had other things. I wanted to scuba dive, because I'm a scuba diver. I wanted to scuba dive the Great Barrier Reef. I wanted to hike the Appalachian Trail. I wanted to dog sled across Alaska. So some crazy stuff. Now, I'm almost done with the Appalachian Trail. I've got about 600 more miles. And I'll do another 200 in a few weeks. So I'm pretty excited about that. I don't know if I'll ever make it to the Barrier Reef, but I scuba dive some great places. But the 10 books, I think I was 19 when I actually completed that list. And so I was pastoring a church actually at 19, a little young, but I was doing that. And went through college and went on to seminary, got married, had 6 kids, coached Little League Baseball, all the things that you do, coming along, and I didn't have time to write. And in my mind, I kept saying, I want to write books. I really feel compelled to write. And I was encouraged to write by the committee that read my dissertation. They wanted me to do something with it, to write it in a way people would want to read it, because no one wants to read that. I don't even think they wanted to read that. But I just didn't have time. Because, when I thought about writing a book, I'm thinking 65,000 words, 70,000 you're writing a novel, you're talking about 90,000 words, or however many it is. And I didn't have time. And so suddenly I'm in my 40s and I hadn't written my first book. And it dawned on me somewhere along the way that I needed to quit thinking about writing a book and start thinking about writing sentences. And so that was a big shift for me, to start devoting an hour a day to writing. And that's really how I finally wrote my first book. It was an hour a day. I just calendared that in. That took me about 4 years to get the first one done, an hour a day. Now, as I was writing that nonfiction book, it's called Immovable, Standing Firm in the Last Days, which it's not the first one that was published. I was kind of going around with the publisher about that. It took a little while. But during lunch, I would also, I just got curious as to whether or not I could write a novel. I didn't even read fiction. I was not a big fiction reader. It's a long story. I started listening to historical fiction, so I wondered if I could write a novel. And so at lunch I began doing that just for fun. I'm a scuba diver and I love history, and so I began to connect history and scuba diving and treasure hunting. And somewhere in there, maybe I forget how long I've been working on it, but my daughter was going on a mission trip to Cambodia, and she needed money to pay for a trip. And I had my other book finished by this point, and I was dealing with publishers about it, trying to jump through their hoops and make them happy. And it's so frustrating. If you've ever been down that road, it's very frustrating. And And so I had this other book that was I was just playing around. It was like a bedtime story that just wouldn't end. And I thought, well, I could self-publish that novel and help her raise some money to go to Cambodia. And then I thought, what kind of novels sell? This was sort of a historical fiction, but I'm not real sure what genre it fit in, to tell you the truth. And about that time, 50 Shades of Grey came out in a novel. It hadn't come out in a movie yet. I didn't read it, but I heard people talking about it, and it sounded like trash to me. And I began to think about, what kind of relationship do people really want to have? They don't want to have that. They want to have a real meaningful relationship. And so I got inspired to take that novel, and this is hilarious because I've never even read a romance, but I got inspired to take that novel and turn it into romantic suspense and market it to secular people. To say, it's a biblical model of relationship. It's healthy relationships. The early books don't really say a lot about Christianity, even on through book 6. In book 6, it does present the gospel creatively using the historical stuff in Mexico, but I decided to write this book and target that secular audience. And so when I did, I never intended it to be a series. I just was one and done. I wrote it. It did pretty well way back then, and I began getting emails from people, when's the sequel coming out? And so I thought, this could be a fun backdoor way to minister to people, not as a pastor. I didn't put my real name on it because I wrote Bible studies and Bible teaching. I had a book on Psalms and Proverbs and other stuff. And so I made up a name because here's my thought. Who wants to read a romance by a pastor? I mean, honestly. Of course, I tell people when I speak at conferences that I have 6 children, so I should know something about romance. My wife would say, just because you have 6 children doesn't mean you know anything about it. But it was a lot of fun writing it because isn't life about relationships? And so, of course, to write about the scuba diving, I had to go scuba diving, and I call it research, so I thought that's fun. And anyway, it turned into 6 full novels. I've written a 7th novella this past Christmas that I'm actually going to start giving away for free, I think. So if you want that for free, I've got a little thing with it you can get. But, well, when I got my first book back with my real name on it, back in whatever year that was, I thought to myself, I set a goal of 10 books. And here's my first one. Though I'd already written one with a fake name on it. But here's my first one with my name on it. And then it dawned on me, my goal wasn't really to write 10 books. My goal was to write 10 books that people would read. And there's a big difference. Because I had no clue about marketing and selling. And 1 million books are published every year. And so I had to go on the journey of learning how to market. And so I tell people now, if you're going to be a successful author, you've got to be an effective marketer. And authors don't want to market. I didn't get into this to market. I don't have a degree in marketing. I hate marketing. But my message is too important not to market it. And so I started that journey. So I did write a book a couple years ago. Actually, I released it on March the 8th of 2020, and the world shut down on March the 10th of 2020. So it was a terrible time to release a book. But I wrote a book on marketing to help authors know how to market their stuff. It's really targeted to Christian authors, but it applies to anybody across the board because you got to learn the basics on how you're going to get your message out. So I do write nonfiction. I've got, I don't know how many different books out on that. I've got 6 full novels and a novella, fiction, romantic, suspense, Christian. You might think of it as just wholesome. It does have a Christian message. And then I've got a few books for authors, a few specifically targeting pastors that you can really expand your influence through writing and publishing. And so why not? You write a sermon. Why not increase the shelf life of that and put it out? And so God can continue to use it. I did that with a book on Psalms. I wrote it for a series I was doing that summer. And I planned my preaching a year ahead of time. So I began working on this book. And then that summer came out. My congregation got it, read it. It was, as far as I was concerned, it was a success because that was my goal. But then it began to sell on Amazon, began selling around the world, won a few awards. It was like, wow, isn't it amazing? I wrote that for my congregation, and God is using it in France and Italy, wherever. And so it just said to me, you can change the world. through your writing. If you'll just be obedient, if you'll let God use you, whether you're telling stories or whether you're teaching God's Word. The Following Jesus book he mentioned is a Bible. It was my first Bible study book that I wrote. And I did use a little allegory, sort of like Pilgrim's Progress. I'm a backpacker, so I pulled from that to have a little story to introduce each section. But storytelling is so valuable. I think you can convey really important messages through story. Anyway, that's who I am. I love to write. I write every day. I feel compelled to do that. I just finished a book on spiritual health. My brother and I wrote it together. We do some stuff to help churches evaluate church health. And so this is a resource to go along with that. But anyway, that's pretty awesome.
We've got one more question for our authors, official questions, and then we'll open up to questions from y'all. I forgot to mention that the authors will have their books for sale at the end tonight. And for you at home, the best way to find it, I guess, is to go on Amazon, right? Click on the link that says books, then click on the link that says advanced search, and then type in the author's name. We've got Scott Ness, Karen Ketcham with an A, Ketcham, or Tim Riordan, Riordan, and you can find the books there as well. But the profits are better if you were here. All right, the last question is, what have you written? And more importantly, what are you working on now? So, yeah.
Sort of already mentioned a lot of what I've written. I've written 15 books. My goal was 10. My 10th book was called Wisdom Speaks, Life Lessons from Proverbs. So when I wrote that, I really felt like, wow, I cannot believe this is my 10th book. When I was 18, I started this list and finished at 19. This is my 10th book. So it was a great sense of satisfaction, but I realized that God didn't really just call me to write 10 books. He called me to influence people through writing. And so I'll continue to write. I love to do it. I just wrote a book called 30 Days to Spiritual Health. Just literally came out. I really wrote it to use in our ministry of church health. And but who knows what God will do with that. I'm currently working on a second edition to my early novels. I've always heard that it's best to write your first novel and publish your second one, because your first one reads like your first one. And so if so I'm working on a second edition because I've got a new series I'm working on that I hope to come out in 2023, but it may be a little later. But it's a series of 3 novels, and so I think they're a lot better than my first few. And so I said, I'm going to go back and tweak those first ones a little bit. And so I'm doing that. And so if you're here tonight, you want one of those early ones, I got a big discount because I'm just getting rid of them. Matter of fact, if you don't have any money, you can just take one for free. But they were a lot of fun to write. I tried to make them real, life, and I'm not sure if I succeeded in that, but did the best that I could. But it's a lot of fun writing the fiction. I'm working on, in addition to the second edition to those first 3, I'm also working on a book called Immovable Kids. My first nonfiction book that I actually wrote, not the first one that came out, but the first one that I wrote, was called Immovable, Standing Firm in the Last Days. And it really was to say that as we move toward the return of Christ, the scripture says that things will get more difficult, not easier. I'm 60 years old. In my lifetime, it's gotten more difficult, not easier. And we know that. We see it going on in our world today. It's a challenge. And some of that is what the scripture talks about, spiritual conflict, the spiritual warfare. I know there's all kinds of spectrums when you hear that word spiritual warfare, that you can go across the spectrum of theologically of people in different persuasions. But the fact is, there's a spiritual battle we live in every day, regardless of how you embrace that or define it. And so as followers of Jesus, we have a challenge to fight the good fight, to shine the light of Christ in the world that we live. And I saw a connection between the spiritual armor of Ephesians chapter 6 with prophecy about the last days. There is a connection between those 6 pieces of armor. And so I wrote this book to say, as you move toward the conclusion of time, you need to put on spiritual armor. It has last days implications. So that was my first book. Now I'm working on a follow-up to that called Immovable Kids, because I don't think our children are prepared for the culture that they're growing into. And and I'm very concerned about our children. I'm concerned about my grandchildren. It's not Mayberry anymore. You know, we never locked our doors growing up, and you know, we just live in a different world. And so our children need to learn how to stand for truth. They need to learn how to put on a breastplate of righteousness and do the right thing, whether anyone else is doing it or not. And so this book, I don't know how long it'll take me, but I'm working on one called Immovable Kids, and then I'm going to work on 6 smaller ones that are targeted to parents to say, here's how you help your children with these unique aspects of the spiritual armor. So anyway, that's my nonfiction challenge right now, other than continuing to do stuff with spiritual health.
I've written one book. Took me 11 years.
No, you've written 2 books.
But it's, well,
2 books.
I don't count that first one. Like you said, that first one.
Like candy.
No, it's right. The first one, no, it's in a drawer. But this one is one that I was written. This is a fact-based fiction. I had my son-in-law was a history major, so I had him find a setting for me. Like I said, I had the story in my head, but I needed to know how it would fit in, and even where it would fit in actual history, things that actually happened. And he's the one that found the Little Blue Indian raid in Nebraska in 1864, where there were people kidnapped. And this story is about one of those kidnapped victims. The story is from 1864 to 1874. It's her life with the Indians after she was kidnapped from the Little Blue Indian raids. And I'm writing the sequel to it now. I have 2 sequels, like I said earlier. The one I'm writing now is Standing Bear's Destiny. And then after that, it'll be Standing Bear's Legacy. And that's it.
Do you have a website? I should have said that. Do you have a website for all that too?
There's one that's set up, yeah, through the publisher. But I don't look at it. You know, I'm really very much a novice at this, and I know they have one, but I don't know what to do with it.
Karen, are you found on Facebook?
Well, no, just me, just Karen Ketcham. I mean, I don't have I was going to set up one. I just was published in February. And my daughter was going to set up a website for Standing Bear's Bright Angel, and I just haven't pursued that. But the books are available on Amazon, Kindle, and at Barnes and Noble.
Tim's got a great book that you might want to take home.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So I wrote this one. Like I said, I was planning to move to Ethiopia. That fell through at the 11th hour. And so we had about a 2-year gap here where I was in between church calls and figuring out what we're going to do. And so that's when I wrote the bulk of the Following the Master book. And so now I'm at a point where I have a full-time job and 6 kids and I don't know, a lot of other stuff I need to do. And so trying to write now has been the challenge of getting in there. So that's part of my struggle at this point, but currently, along with this one and kind of connecting with that, I've got, my dad has been writing a memoir, and so I've been working with him on that. He's a successful business entrepreneur, and kind of telling the story of early days of his work, and became a very successful company up in Ohio that's all across the nation, and then some family fun dynamics, like all of our families that can be challenging from times, how we worked through that together as a family. So that project is nearly complete. And so what I'm currently working on, a little bit like the Immovable Kids, I'm working on my next book, which will be how we pass along faith to our children. And not with a bunch of Jesus chores, as I like to call them, but how do we authentically instill faith as families? How do we surround our children with people of impact and importance? I call it faith loving, that every kid needs to have as many surrogate grandmas and grandpas as they can. And so my parents and my wife's parents, or my wife's mom, live in Ohio still. We're here. My kids need grandmas here, right? And so I've got, thankfully, in the church, a whole bunch of grandmas that come and love the stuffing out of my kids. And so how do you do that intentionally? How do you create a network of intentional people who come alongside of and support and encourage and know your teachers' names and come to your sporting events and all that, and say, how do you do that with intentionality? And so trying to do some of those types of things. And so how do you pass on faith? How do you make it not just the stuff of the Bible or the book, but how do you live that? How do you engage that? How do you make that a part of your daily life? And you know, what rituals can you do that are impactful and make life rich? Right? There's something beautiful about rich rituals. And so how do you do that? And how do you deal with tough stuff? How do you talk about when somebody goes into an elementary school and shoots a bunch of kids? You know, that's tough. My kids are aware of that. How do I speak into that? How do I love in the midst of that? How do I insulate my kids? How do I don't want to isolate my kids, but I want to insulate them. You know, I don't want to remove them from the world around them, but I want to make sure that the world around them doesn't infect them, but they are a positive infection into the world. And so trying to find ways to do that and stories that instill that and pass that along and make faith real, not plastic, powerful, engaging, and raise up children that are, you know, have social capital and esteem components to their life that can enter into a world that is very hostile, right? Regardless of your worldview, it's a hostile world out there, but certainly, you know, as a man of faith, it's a hostile world. And how do I make resilient kids? And so I'm passionate about that because I want that for my kids. And as a pastor, I'm constantly talking with parents and grandparents who are terrified about the world that their kids and grandkids are growing up into. And so what can we do to inoculate against that a little bit? So the challenge is time to do that, and it's a slog, but it's fun, and it's a joy. And so I always have my notebook with me, and if I get 5 minutes, if I got 15 minutes, I'll start writing and compiling. Tim, I've got several sermon series that are ready to be published, but writing is different than publishing, and I like writing. I don't love publishing, right? I don't love that component of it, and so you know, I get passionate. I'm also ADHD, so I get distracted easily. And so, oh yeah, I did that. That was great. That would be such a good resource for people. But something over here is shiny, so let's go look at the shiny things. So it's a little bit of my reality as well. But yeah, it's fun. It's a fun journey. I can't say that I had at 19 of passions or desires to write 10 books, but yeah, that's awesome. And congrats on what you've done with it. But yeah, I love writing. And so one of the other things that I'm doing is, you know, I send out weekly devotional emails that are kind of honing my craft, and a lot of those concepts, kind of putting them in the feedback on that is fantastic, and trying to grow that and make that a part of who I am and what I do, and hone the craft between books. So yeah. Awesome. Good.
So before we open up questions, is there any more? Oh, I forgot.
I have one thing I'd like to say.
Okay.
I didn't tell you that my pen name is Judah Knight. If you're interested in that, I do have two websites, judahknight.com and timriordan.com. And you can find information. I'm not sure that I put my newest book on my website lately. I need to make sure that's updated, but I do try to blog a little bit. I'm telling you, it's tough to maintain that discipline of blogging, you know, once a week or whatever. I have a real problem with that. I mean, you know, like Scott's saying, it's just a challenge sometimes to preach on Sunday. You know, it's just a miracle sometimes I have something to say. So it's, Sunday comes around really regularly. I mean, it's unbelievable how quickly it comes when you're a pastor. But I am blessed to be at an awesome church. And but anyway, timriordan.com and judahknight.com is the fiction.
And I've got a website, scottness.com, and then I also am on Facebook at Scott M. Ness is my author page, which I don't do a ton with, but there's links to the emails, and then you can find
Any questions for our author panel?
Where did you get that name from, Judah?
My son, this is my oldest son, has always loved the name Judah. And he said he was going to name his kid Judah. And so I came home and said, I really need a fake name, something that I can go by. I got to come up with something. And Timothy said, Judah, you got to do Judah. And so then I had to come up with a last name, and we lived sort of near Knight Road or Knight something. And so I passed that every day. So I thought, Judah Knight, why not? And so that's where it came from. It's really not very inspirational, but I just needed something. And then someone told me one time that Judah could be female or male. I never thought about that. I mean, I've always thought of it as a male name, but it's a little weird having a pen name, because I was scuba diving in Mexico, for example, doing research, right? And had to go into a dive shop to figure out what wrecks I'm going to dive, and I had to write I needed some wrecks in my story, and so I was speaking with the dive master. I told him I was doing some research for a book, and he wanted to know what book, and he knew me from my writing, except he knew me as Judah Knight, not Tim Riordan, and so I'm Judah Knight to him, and so he introduces me to everybody as Judah Knight. So when I speak places as a novelist, I'm Judah Knight. So it's a little weird. I feel a little funny when people call me Judah, and I go, oh wait, they're talking to me, So it's a little odd. I will say, as a novelist, I have opportunity to speak places that I can't speak as a pastor, and so that's helpful. When COVID hit, I was supposed to be doing a book tour in Mexico, and that got canceled, but I was going to be speaking at universities, not as a pastor, but as a fiction writer, as a novelist. And so there's some pretty neat things about that, and I'm able to share wholesome stories and then invite them to a church that night where maybe I'll be speaking, and we'll share the gospel and talk about spiritual things. But anyway, I just made it up.
Y'all dress differently?
It's a little weird, trying to, and it's not like I don't want people to know who I am, but I suppose if you're not a Christian and you want to read a wholesome romantic suspense, and you know that the pastor wrote it, you might not want to read it, But then again, you might be like, what a pastor would write in a romantic suspense. That's a little different. But no, I pretty much dress the same.
I've got a question for Karen, because you're standing next, you got these two pastors on either side of you. So I'm going to ask you this question, because it is important, I think, that there's a message that underlies every story that an author inserts in the story. It's the takeaway that you want your reader to get out of the story, something that you buried in there. What would you like your reader, when they're done, they smile as they close the book? What is it that you hope that they've taken away from your story?
That God is with you through everything. Even when something bad happens, good will come from it.
Okay. That works? That sells. That'll sell.
Can I say something? Karen's, these two guys are actually sitting beside the choir director. And sometimes I'll go in there, we'll be going to church on Wednesday night, and sometimes she'll forget her satchel. Well, she's got a satchel for her choir stuff, she's got a satchel for her writing stuff. And sometimes I'll go into the office and I'll go, are you working on choir, or are you working on your book? But something that you said a while ago about, we've got Vacation Bible School coming up. You said something about insulating the children and not isolating the children. If you isolate the children, then there's no way that they'll be able to witness.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So that's a good statement.
Yeah, one of the woman at the well, right? That story from John 4, I think it is. One of the profound components of that is, at the end, after that, life-altering encounter with the Lord, Jesus says to her, now, stay here. And I know you want to follow me and you want to go on the road with me. Stay here. Continue to do, because people knew who you were and see who you are now, which might be a little bit of Hank's story in what your mission is here, right? Which is absolutely beautiful. And that's the kingdom, right? That's the kingdom.
And Tim and to Scott both, because you are involved in the church the way that you are. I mean, listen, I've been there, done it. Thank God I'm not there anymore. And not that God put me somewhere else. But the point being is who do you work with, or who's your critique partners, your writing buddy, your writing, inspiration that helps you in that course? I think both of you have different stories that way, I'm sure.
Sure. Yeah. So I've got several. One through my academic journey. I've got connections with two dear mentors of mine, Lynn Sweet and Frank Viola, who are both. I don't think Lynn Sweet has an unpublished thought. If he thinks something, he published it, right? I mean, if you don't know him, he's a pretty prolific writer. Certainly prolific. Writes 2 or 3 books a year. Wrote several books with Frank Viola, who's another accomplished author and blogger and all those things. And so I've been, sitting at their feet, learning from them in a lot of ways. And they're kind of some of the folks who give me the big picture. And then I've got another friend who I've invested. He's got a bunch of books. He's not well known, but he is probably among the smartest men I know and most creative and fantastic. And so I've spent time sitting at his feet, learning the craft better. And then I've got 2 of my dearest friends that every week I'm at least 3 or 4 conversations on the phone. Every day we're texting back and forth, and we share things that we're writing or thinking and laughing. It goes from complete banter and ridiculousness to profound truths like that, just like any good deep friend. And so I rely on them. They're the kick in the pants I need sometimes. They're the pick you up when you get kicked down. And so they're my faith community and have enhanced my writing in ways that they kind of know because I tell them all the time, but they have no idea how much they have enhanced my craft, but also my faith in my life.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
I have a gentleman that I meet with every couple of weeks. He's also a writer, and we sort of hold each other accountable to our goals and what we're working on. In addition to that, my older brother and I still very close relationship. We're very different. We're both musicians. He's just more on the spatial end of the musician world, and I'm maybe on the other end. And so we talk about a lot of things. We used to work together. He was minister of music, I was pastor at a church together. And this newest book he and I wrote together, he's never written a book, though he's written a lot of stuff. He's just never done much with it. And so anyway, we talk about theology, about ministry, and about a lot of things that when I'm working through, grappling through something, I bounce some things off of him as well. I've got several writing mentors in my life in the fiction world. One of them is Tim Shoemaker. I don't know if you know who that is. He writes for Zondervan. He's an excellent writer. He writes middle school stuff for middle school kids. And excellent writer. And that's one reason I'm doing a second edition is because of him. This whole show don't tell and deep point of view and all those things that I didn't even know what all that meant when I first started. And actually the book that is there now is actually tweaked from the original, but still I wanted to take it a little deeper. And so I learned all that stuff from Tim Shoemaker. And so hanging out with him, going to his conferences, having lunch with him, talking about stuff, he's a good friend and a really positive influence. I've had some great experiences at some Christian Writers Conferences. I go to Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference every year. I would encourage you to find some good conferences to go to.
You just won an award through one of them, didn't you?
I did. On the Following Jesus, I won the Sale Award. The Following Jesus 21 Days Journey. So that was a big honor. Sale Award's is a Christian in the Christian world. In writing, it's a big deal. So I would say for Christian authors, submit your books to stuff like that. It's a great experience for one thing. It's an honor if you're chosen. And they have the awards thing at the Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference. So that's the award ceremony for the Sale Awards. But anyway, I go to that every year, and it's just you just meet some great people. One thing I love about Christian writing is that we're not competitors. We're all in this together, and so everybody's helping everybody, which is how it ought to be in the body of Christ. There ought to be synergistic experience as we are growing from one another, interdependent, we're working together. And so whenever someone has something that I might can help them with, I love helping them. Or when I need help, they love helping me. And I just think that's how it ought to be. And so I would say find some mentors in your life, hang out, grow together. You'll be better because of it. And some Christian Writers Conferences or just writing conferences would be a great benefit.
Karen, not to leave you out, what is your best advice to somebody who's trying to write that first novel? What advice would you give to somebody?
Well, I think it's advice that I really should take myself, which I don't like I should, but to write something every day. Even if you have to go back and chunk it all, if you get in the discipline of writing something every day, I think you get better, and you probably come up with some good stuff to keep too.
Very good.
So are you doing that?
No,
I'm holding you accountable.
about every other day. But this year I have tried to make it one of my resolutions to write more, because I don't want the sequel to take 11 years. Because then the next one will take another
Okay,
11.
follow-up question. Your mother has her hip now, so when do you do your writing?
Oh, in the morning, usually before Mike gets up, I'll spend about an hour writing.
Good. Any other questions for our county?
I had a question for Karen. You sounded like your book is about Native American history.
Yes.
So what got you interested in Native American history, and how did you do the research for it?
Well, my son-in-law did the research. He was a history major, so a lot of questions, anything that I had, I would write down in a notebook and say if it was Ryan's homework, and I'd give it to him. And he would do the research for me, which I just tried to weave into the story. And where I got that influence or I don't know, the story just came to me. It was just something in my head. I really don't know, because it's been in there so long, I don't know where it came from. And I don't have anything in particular that made me interested in Indians or that time, but, and like I said, the story was there even before I had the setting. My son-in-law was the one that found the Little Blue Indian raids of Nebraska in 1864, and it was just perfect, so.
What tribe was that?
It's Pawnee.
Pawnee.
Pawnee. She's kidnapped. It was a group of Cheyenne, Sioux, and I believe Arapaho Indians that banded together and attacked the Little Blue communities. But she was taken and sold to the Sioux. But then the Pawnee raided the Sioux village, and she was taken from the Sioux, and so she lived in the Pawnee.
The Pawnee were the scouts that helped the cavalry. They were not warrior.
No, they were more peaceful. They were very religious, and they were more white friendly than other Native Americans.
Yeah, the Pawnee helped the cavalry and the army and all, because they got tired of being picked on by the other tribes.
Any other questions? I want to thank Hank and Shelly Arnold for hosting tonight. It's an honor to be able to host the first presentation at Coweta FORCE. And I guess the overriding theme tonight is kind of passion. Hank started off with his passion for recovery. And then the authors tonight talked about their passion for writing and the passion for faith, as it all comes down to it. And to put it on the audience at home, your passion is reading. So hopefully you'll be supporting our authors, Hometown Novel Nights. I want to thank you all tonight. I want to thank you all for being here.
And visit hometownnovel.com to find out our next events.